Hello and welcome. Sometimes the numbers that actually show up in the official reports, they do not quite line up with the way the debates get framed on both sides of the Atlantic. In recent years, the EU saw millions of people arriving from outside its borders, over 4 million in some peak periods. But when you dig into the asylum side of the things, the picture shifts. Hundreds of thousands apply every year, yet recognition rates hover around 40 to 50%, depending on the year. And a good chunk of overall migration isn't even through the dramatic Mediterranean boats that dominates the headlines. It's not the simple invasion or humanitarian triumph story that politicians on either end like to sell. And if you are sitting in cities like Madrid, Chicago, London, or Berlin, wondering how this all connects to jobs, schools, taxes, and that quiet feeling that your neighborhood or your country's future is changing in ways nobody's fully explaining. Well, that's exactly why we are digging in today. Stick with me because the data has layers most cable news segments never touch. This is In Focus with Dr. Adeel, where we step back from the noise, look at the hard numbers, and try to make sense of the forces that are shaping our world. Let's really sit with this idea for a second, because migration isn't some abstract policy debate happening far away. It lands right in the everyday realities that affect families from Ohio to London, Ontario, and Glasgow. Think about it like this: Europe's population is aging fast. Fertility rates across much of the EU sit well below the replacement level of about 2.1 kids per woman, and often around 1.5 or lower in places like Italy or Germany. Without some form of net inflow, countries would be looking at shrinking workforces, strained pension systems, and fewer people filling roles in everything from healthcare to construction. That's not ideology, that's basic demographics hitting pocketbooks and public services. At the same time, the human side is impossible to ignore. Families fleeing conflict, people seeking better economic chances and opportunities. We have seen dramatic images of boats in the Mediterranean. UNHCR data tracks those sea arrivals, with thousands attempting the central Mediterranean route each year, though numbers have fluctuated and even declined in some recent periods due to policy shift and interceptions. But here is the broader picture from Eurostat in 2023 and 2024. Immigration to the EU from non-EU countries was in the range of 4.2 to 4.4 million people annually, contributing to a positive net migration of around 3 million in key years after accounting for outflows. Asylum applications have swung too, over a million first time claims in peak recent years, dropping notably in 2025 to around 669,000, with protection granted to hundreds of thousands. For example, about 438,000 in 2024, down a bit the following year. The central question hanging over all this: how well do these flows actually match the political narratives we are fed? Whether it's crisis, overwhelming the system, or purely beneficial diversity with no trade offs. Because for the average viewers watching their local services stretch or hearing about integration challenges in places like Sweden or France, it feels personal. As we are seeing orderly integration that strengthen economies, or their real frictions in security, labor markets, and long term social cohesion that gets downplayed. I want you to keep that question in mind, because as we layer in the data, the story gets more nuanced than the sound bites suggested. And trust me, the part about what the actual patterns reveal versus the headlines that's coming, Actually, hold on. Before we go deeper, let's ground this in the flow patterns themselves because the raw numbers often surprise people on both sides. Eurostat tracks it methodically. A big portion of recent non EU immigration isn't asylum driven in the classic refugee sense. Many come through family reunification, work visas, or other legal channels. Sea arrivals via routes like Central Mediterranean have seen drops in recent years. For instance, UNHCR and related monitoring showed attempts and arrivals fluctuating, with notable decreases at times due to cooperation agreements and enforcements through tragic losses at sea continues, reminding us this isn't abstract. On the asylum side, first instance recognition rates have varied about 39 to 51% in recent data from Eurostat, meaning a substantial share of claims do not result in protection status. That's not to dismiss genuine cases from places like Syria or Afghanistan, which have featured prominently in applicants' nationalities alongside others. But it does highlight that the system processes mixed flows. Some fleeing persecution, other economic migrants using asylum routes when legal pathways are limited. Now, think about the economic overlay for a moment. Foreign born residents make up a growing share, around 10.4% of the EU population, born outside the bloc as of recent figures, totaling tens of millions. Employment rates for non EU born individuals lag behind natives, often in the 60 to 70% range, versus higher for locals, with challenges like language barriers, overqualification in some cases, or recognition of skill playing a role. Yet, in many countries, migrants fill labor gaps in aging societies. PEW research has long noted how immigration has accounted for much or all of population growth in several European nations over recent decades, preventing sharper declines. But here is the breadcrumb. The integration evidence isn't uniformly rosy or dire, and once you see how security data and demographic projections intersect with these patterns, the entire framing starts to look different. Let's contrast the political heat with the methodological data. On one hand, politicians across the spectrum frame it as either an existential threat to culture and security or an unqualified economic boon. But look at the evidence. Economic integration shows mixed results. Eurostat labor stats indicate non-EU born workers often face higher unemployment or temporary contracts initially, though second generation outcomes can improve. Crime and security overlays. Official data does not support blanket claims of surge tied to migration in a simplistic way. Most studies show complex factors at play, with overrepresentation in certain statistics in some contexts offset by broader societal trends. Yet high profile incidents do fuel public anxiety, and integration challenges in parallel societies have been documented in places with rapid inflows. Historically, think back to how Western societies absorbed past waves, post World War II labor migration, or earlier refugee movements. Parallels exist, but scale and speed matters, as does the cultural distance in some recent flows. PEW research has explored attitudes. Many Europeans express concerns about integration, particularly around Muslim communities, who form a notable but minority share of migrants, with worries about value alignment or social cohesion. At the same time, data shows contribution to GDP and innovation in various sectors. Let's talk about the structural insight. Migration helps offset low fertility. Without it, projections show steeper population drops in many EU countries. But it does not magically solve aging or fiscal pressure long term, as migrants themselves age and fertility patterns often converge. And here is another layer most miss: irregular crossings and asylum backlogs strain systems, leading to policy response. EU's new Pact on Migration and Asylum, which aims to speed processing and share burdens. But effectiveness varies. by member states. This isn't a flat success or failure story. It's a complex system with real human costs on all sides, from migrants risking lives to host communities feeling cultural or economic pressure. Stopping now would be missing the paradigm shift ahead, because when we look at the long term demographics, that's where the data really challenges assumptions. Here is the core counterintuitive part that changes how you read the headlines. The migration crisis, as endlessly portrayed, isn't primarily an uncontrolled flood of millions of asylum seekers every single year, overwhelming Europe in a permanent 2015 style surge. Recent Eurostat figures show asylum applicants fluctuating and dropping significantly in 2025, down over 25% in first claims from prior peaks, with net migration driven more by varied legal and economic inflows than pure irregular asylum chaos. Protection grants numbers in the hundreds of thousands annually, not millions, and many flows stabilize or adjust via return and policy. Yet the deeper twist is demographic. Even moderate continued migration combined with higher fertility among some migrants groups, as PEW has modeled for Muslim population, projecting rises even under zero migration scenarios due to age structure and birth rates, means Europe's composition is shifting steadily. Foreign-born population have grown to record levels around 64 million, including intra-EU in recent estimates, helping stave off outright decline in countries like Germany or Italy where native fertility is low. Without inflows, populations shrink. With them, growth continues but brings integration demands that data shows are uneven. Employment gaps persist for some origins. Cultural cohesion tests arise in communities where parallel structures form. Picture a specific family, a Syrian refugee who arrived years ago, now working in German factory, kids in school learning the language, contributing taxes while navigating identity questions, or a young Afghan whose claim was processed amid backlog facing uncertainty. These are not statistics, they are lives shaped by decisions under pressure on both sending and receiving ends. The paradigm shift: neither the alarmist Europe is being replaced nor the optimistic diversity solves everything without friction. Fully capture it. The real data reveals a managed but imperfect process in flow, offset demographics, but requires serious evidence based integration efforts on language, labor, and social norms to avoid long term strains. Public trust erodes when narratives ignore the gaps between rhetoric and outcome. That's the uncomfortable analytical truth systems can adopt, but pretending there are no trade offs or that all patterns are equal does not serve anyone. So, answering the central question directly with the humility the evidence demands, the migration situation is not the monolithic crisis or unqualified success that politicians often claim. Actual data from Eurostat, UNHCR, and PEW shows fluctuating flows, partial integration successes alongside persistent challenges in employment and cohesion, security incidents that are real but not the dominant drivers, and demographic implications where migration buys time against aging but does not eliminate the need for domestic policy fixes like family support or workforce reforms. Uncertainty remains. Future inflows depends on global conflicts, economic and EU policies integration outcomes vary widely by origin, education and host efforts. What you should take away: look beyond the headlines, demand methodological data over anecdotes. Recognize that behind every figure are human stories. The migrant families building a new life, the local worker feeling competition or cultural shift, the policymakers balancing compassion with capacity. This leaves us smarter, but yes, a bit unsettled because sustainable approaches require honest acknowledgement of both benefits and frictions, not polarized framing. Think about how this data reframes your own view when you next hear a debate what policies might better align flows with integration realities. The biggest takeaway: migration to Europe involves real data driven complexities, flows that offset demographic decline but demand rigorous integration to work for everyone involved, and pretending it's simpler than that serves no one. If this shifted how you are reading the news, hit the subscribe button because we'll keep unpacking these big picture forces with the same focus on evidence over echo chambers. Next time, we are driving into another layer of the global shifts nobody's fully connecting yet. Thank you very much for watching. This is Dr. Adeel, and you are watching In Focus with Dr. Adeel.